Hello, everyone. It's Monday. So you're watching this Wednesday, but I'm recording this Monday. I wanted to do this close to Easter, as close as I could. So we're only one day out from Easter as I record this, and I'm still, of course, living on the waves of Easter Day, where there's no day really like it for us throughout the year, where we are just so aware of the larger picture of faith and the larger picture of life and the larger picture of God's help and really the great history and story of Christian faith. I tell my folks here every Sunday morning that we've come to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, and that is what the first day of the week is. It's a celebration of the resurrection. It's remembering, celebrating always. And no matter what kind of news marks our week, the good news of Jesus is always the real, the best, the truest news on any given day, but especially on the first day of the week, where again, we are remembering the resurrection of Christ, first day of the week, which is why we gather on Sundays. So this is at the heart of it, but only one day out from Easter, I'm processing what it means to take yesterday's faith and yesterday's lift and yesterday's centering event and now process it on Monday. And then Tuesday and then Wednesday and all the other days is how do we carry on this resurrection faith throughout the year? What's telling and interesting in the Gospels after the resurrection of Jesus, this 40 days, I should say, that he is with them, some bit of their life just went back to normal. So you find in John's Gospel, Jesus appearing to them when they're fishing. He's on the shore, they're in the water. They've gone back to fishing because you have to eat and you have to fish if you're a fisherman. And this is what they're doing. And the book of Acts, of course, shows the disciples in the city, but going up to the temple, which is what they would have done because they were in the city. Paul, of course, with all of his life and preaching, will still make tents, will still make a living doing what he does. And people really do have to go on with life, even though the resurrection has occurred. People really did have to figure out what it meant for Jesus to be alive, to be resurrected from the dead, and yet they're still living life. It's been pointed out that the earliest generation of Christians didn't think they would die. That is, they thought Christ would return, they'd be taken, and they really didn't have to worry about cemeteries or end of life because they just so anticipated the return of Christ in their lifetime. We, of course, do as well. But the resurrection of Christ is not our resurrection yet, and we do have to find a way to live with that in mind, and yet the concrete details of life in mind. And as we, of course, in this season, the only Easter any of us can remember where we couldn't go to church or chose not to go to church for the safety of everyone. How do we do this in the coronavirus era when it's different and much is pressing on us? I want to give you just one simple idea about how we carry on in modern life, daily life, with resurrection being real. Just one idea, and that is that you and I have to raise the horizon. That's how we do this. You raise the horizon. That, of course, is that line as far as we can see as we look out. It's the horizon. It's the line between sky and ground. But as we know, we can only see so far when we're walking at our level. When we are in the air, the horizon is farther. There's lots that shapes how we actually see a horizon. But more importantly, there's pressure on all of us to shorten the horizon. And that really takes away from how life should be lived and could be lived well. And I mean that we're tempted to shorten the horizon all the time. Like if you get to work and you get busy and it's finally like 10 o'clock, your horizon is lunch. I mean, you're reducing the busyness, the dailiness, the frustration, and the hecticness with, well, the next horizon is lunch. And then from there, the next horizon is when you get to go home. And when you go home, the next horizon might be dinner. The next horizon might be bedtime. The next horizon, or for you, might be when you've got to get up again. But horizons take many, many shapes, and we rightly look to them and keep them in mind. So Friday becomes a horizon you are looking toward. The weekend becomes a horizon. A week becomes a month becomes a horizon. Or winter or summer or fall or spring, they all become their own horizons, or a year or an era. Seasons of life when children are growing, before they get to school, and then when they begin school, and when they end school, and the horizons of their lives, and the horizons of your life. There are so many seasons we go through, but every season has a horizon to it, and we're generally only seeing out to that horizon. Or if we are thinking seriously, of course, about preparing for much larger horizons, we are aware of the cemetery. And the cemetery is a horizon. Death is clearly a horizon in our life that we know about, think about, and I hope, plan for. Plan for those who will be here when we've reached that horizon. The problem with, of course, the cemetery as horizon is it doesn't promote the best behaviors. I can compare it to the years when I would go with the youth group to a place, Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and the kids would go and have a few days. And they'd look forward to it, especially middle school kids that would go to these big youth events. And so we'd go, and our youth minister, Jay, did it enough and knew kids well enough that he required that when they showed up to go on the trip, they handed him $5. This has been a while. $5. He'd take it from them, write their name, put it in an envelope. Because on the way home, there was always one stop in that 5-6 hour drive where they'd go to McDonald's and get a meal, get dinner. He knew, being middle schoolers, they weren't going to save that $5 for that meal on the way home. Their horizons were much, much closer and sooner and shorter than that one. So while we had that horizon in mind for the way home, they did not. What he learned, we all learned from experiences, when the kids got there with $30, $50, $100, they would get into downtown Gatlinburg and start buying things right away, right off the bat, because that's the only horizon they could see. I am here, I have money, I'm going to spend it on a new skateboard, on this, on that, and then they're out of money they needed. And they had no concept that other horizon was waiting. And so they'd turn in money. Years later, he made them turn in money because Jay knew another horizon mattered. Even though they couldn't see it, it mattered. We all do tend to shorten our horizons. And so we often spend more, do more, give more, burn more, are just irresponsible more because the horizon is closer. We think it's closer. It's not. But we've set that horizon. It's the one we're working on. And cemeteries are horizons. Paul would say, the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 32, if Christ is not resurrected, then he says, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. Why don't we just go eat and drink, know that we'll die, and nothing else will matter? That's the horizon, the cemetery. That's it. So why not burn everything if that horizon is coming? I think the coronavirus has created other horizons for us. The horizon for when we return to normalcy, when we might get a high school graduation, a college graduation, when we can go back and eat in restaurants. But the other horizon that's pressing on all of us is death. We're already over 20, I think by today, 22,000 deaths. People are actually dying. And that horizon is there, and it's moved closer to all of us. And so we're trying to be careful. We're trying to stay alive. But that horizon is real and pressing. And it makes us live a certain way positively, but it also might make us think and live another way, not so positively. That horizon that we will one day reach our end. Well, the resurrection of Jesus is supposed to raise the horizon, or I should say, make the horizon much, much farther away. It needs to include all of these things, the shorter horizons, where we can carry faith into all of these places in our life and all the ways we're trying to make promises and keep long promises, and even include the horizon of a cemetery and our own deaths. But because Christ is resurrected and we too face resurrection, the actual horizon of our life is beyond the cemetery. It includes the cemetery, includes everything before the cemetery, but also includes much beyond it. The horizon is farther away. In John 10, verse 7 through 16, he says this, I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. All who ever came before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. And later he says, in verse 27, my sheep listen to my voice. I know them and they follow me. I give them eternal life and they shall never perish. No one can snatch them out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all. No one can snatch them out of my Father's hand. I and the Father are one. Jesus presents himself not as someone hired to care for sheep, but as the actual shepherd, the one who had the most to lose in losing sheep, and therefore was the one willing to give most to protect the sheep. He's presented in John 10 in such wonderful, picturesque speech to remind us that he is committed to us in a way that no one else is committed to us, and that he's able to care for us in a way that no one else can care for us. And the heart he brings to the field, and the heart he brings to the sheep, us, is something that should encourage us. We won't be lost from his grasp. What he has started in us, he is going to complete, and no one can take us away from him. But that horizon is beyond cemeteries. That horizon is beyond 10 years from now. That horizon includes a day in daily bread, but it includes all the days after those days of daily bread, up to cemeteries and beyond. Our horizon is far, far into the future. And we're supposed to live that way. Live knowing that all the small horizons that we are using to measure a life, and measure endings and measure beginnings, and we need all those. But our life doesn't end at the cemetery. Whether the stone you can erect is great or small, seen by people driving by or seen by no one, remembered by generations or not remembered at all, that is not the horizon for which we live or the horizon by which your life is measured. The world really does keep going. Our horizon is beyond cemeteries and beyond funerals and beyond all of it. It's beyond all that we plan for our life to be, even beyond our living. It's resurrection, our own resurrection, as one who cannot be lost. It's beyond all of it. And so we live with those endings in mind, but we also live with it with our own resurrection in mind. The day we will be raised from the dead, bodily. We will be raised as well. That's the ending we think about. Not the funeral ending, not the cemetery ending, but the one that ends with us as the sheep that are remembered. The one for whom Jesus Christ died. That's the ending, where we stand before God. That's the horizon we're working toward. And that horizon, if we have found forgiveness in Christ, that's a good horizon. I'll tell you briefly a story from my own life that has changed the way I think about things. As many of you know, 11 years ago, Thursday, the 16th of April this week, I had surgery for prostate cancer. Again, no symptoms, except for my father calling me because he'd been diagnosed. And so at 44, I was diagnosed, and my numbers were 3 times as bad as my father's. No symptoms, certainly wouldn't have survived it, except for that fortuitous turn of events, which remains a great mystery to me, but a place of great gratitude and thankfulness. But I remember the day my doctor called me with the numbers and said she was almost certain these numbers were bad enough, this is what this means. I remember I'd gone home that day, and Jennifer was back with her parents, and her father had been ill, and I was at the house all by myself. And so I was the only one who knew I had cancer. I mean, we'd not done the biopsy yet, but these numbers were bad enough to show that it was likely the case. So I remember going home and looking up online and trying to understand what it means and being really, really disheartened. If you want to know what makes a preacher cuss, it is a 24 PSA when you're 44 years old. It was really, really disturbing. Made me angry, made me sad, made me very, very afraid. So I remember going home, and I remember lying down in bed thinking about the prospects. A little bit I'd read, and knowing the process of dying this way was not going to be great. And so I remember I laid in bed, and what I did was I decided to project it all out. In my mind, the worst case scenario. I just went through these horizons of this, of that, of this time, of the process of dying, the day of dying, what will stand after I die. I just went through the whole process. Worst case scenarios, as far as I understood them, if it ended the way I didn't want it to end, how does it end? I mean, how does everything up to age 44? Noah was a senior in high school. Ian was a freshman. How does it end? And what I so remember, and what turned my brain in a really good way, was I realized that it ended well. The cemetery horizon was not a comforting idea, but I looked beyond that to the next horizon, and that is that I would be with God. Not seeing things through a glass darkly, like 1 Corinthians 13 says, but actually with God. Free of bodies, free of frustrations, free of all the broken places in my own life and a broken world, and obviously away from all the things I loved. But in that process, realizing that it would end with God. And it would end with God taking care of my family if I was gone. It would end with my church family taking care of my family when I was gone. When it ended in that horizon, it would end with God. And it would end with my own resurrection from the dead. And so what I decided and what I discovered and what I still hold to and what has changed my brain as a guy who in some way, as I've gone back 11 years now, 10 years of blood work, waiting to see if it has come back. In some ways, I've spent 11 years waiting to know if I'm going to die sooner than I think. What I do know now is that it ends well. That's how it ends. That's the horizon I look to. It includes the Mondays and the lunches and the dinners and the Fridays and the months and the next paycheck and the seasons and age and retirement and cemeteries. It includes all of it, all the grand stuff, the sad stuff. It includes all of it. But my horizon is beyond all of them. And like I mentioned in the Easter sermon, I'm just changing flights. I just keep changing flights until finally I get on the last flight. I will get on the last flight, which is death. And that's the great connecting flight to the end and my own resurrection from the dead. It ends well. That's how I see it. That's the horizon I'm looking toward. And it gives me perspective on coronaviruses and frustrations and ups and downs, all of it. None of these horizons are high enough to take in what life beyond Christ's resurrection really means for all of us. If he is resurrected from the dead, then our faith is not futile. We too will rise from the dead. We too will be given new bodies. He is the first fruit, the first harvest, the first good meal on a large table that God is making many, many good meals and serving everyone. That's the horizon where we sit down to eat. And between now and then, small horizons mark our way, but your eyes have got to be above all the small horizons on the final horizon where we'll be with God. And that flight ends well, and that journey ends well, and God waits for us in a way that no one can wait for us, and will help us in a way that no one can help us. I hope your week after Easter is still filled with the promise of the resurrection of Christ, but also the promise of your own resurrection from the dead, which, as Jesus says in John 10, no one can pluck you from God's hand. No one can get in the way of getting you to that final horizon. And that is really, really good news. I miss you all. Go in grace, go in strength, Go in the great mercy of a God who's able to do more than all we imagine.